You are currently living in a panopticon of your own creation. Every move you make, every word you speak, and every ambition you harbor is being filtered through a phantom jury of peers, strangers, and ghosts from your past. You feel their eyes on your back when you consider speaking up in a meeting. You hear their whispers when you think about launching that project. You feel their smirks when you contemplate dressing with more authority. This is the social suffocation trap. It tells you that your safety depends on your invisibility. It convinces you that if you can just blend in, agree, and stay small, you will avoid the pain of being judged. But what you are actually doing is submitting to a slow-motion execution of your potential. You are not safe, and you are erased. You move from the sovereignty of the creator to the compliance of the performer. You realize that the fear of judgment is not a shield, it is a shroud. But you must realize that judgment is not a fact of reality. It is a byproduct of impact. The only way to avoid judgment is to do nothing, say nothing, and be nothing. If you are safe from criticism, you are irrelevant to the market. The most magnetic version of a human being is the one who has divorced their self-worth from the opinions of the spectators. Most people's confidence is borrowed. It relies on the approval of the crowd. When the crowd frowns, their confidence evaporates, but the sovereign person possesses autonomous authority. You realize that judgment is simply noise generated by people who are too afraid to act themselves. You are moving from seeking permission to commanding presence. Think about the physics of the spotlight. When you step out of the masses, you become a target. This is natural. It is the friction of movement. Most people contract when they feel this friction. They return to the herd. But the confident person leans into the friction. You realize that being judged is the entry fee for being significant. You move from the shame of the criticized to the clinical focus of the leader. You are about to learn that the opinions of others are projections of their own limitations, not reflections of your value. You are moving from performing for the gallery to building for the legacy. This is the manual for the unjudgeable sovereign. We are going to deconstruct the spotlight effect, militarize your internal validation, and neutralize the social weapons used to keep you small. You will learn how to wear the criticism of the masses as a badge of distinction. The prison you are in has no locks, it only has ghosts. It is time to stop auditioning for a life you already own. You are the judge, you are the jury, you are the sovereign. And today, so we begin the liberation of your unshakable voice. Chapter 1. The clinical deconstruction of the spotlight effect. You must now confront the primary psychological hallucination that is paralyzing your potential. The belief that the world is paying a high level of attention to your flaws. Most people move through life as if they are the protagonist of a film that everyone else is watching with a critical, unforgiving eye. They believe that their stutter in a meeting, their choice of attire, or their past failures are being archived and debated by a secret committee of their peers. This is the spotlight effect. It is a cognitive bias where you overestimate the extent to which your actions and appearance are noted by others. It tells your subconscious that you are constantly on trial, which forces you into a defensive, contracted posture. But the person who masters the sovereign voice understands the clinical deconstruction. You realize that everyone else is far too imprisoned in their own spotlight effect to truly notice yours. You move from the paranoia of the performer to the freedom of the invisible architect. Think about the physics of egocentric bias. In psychology, we are all the centers of our own universes. Every person you meet is currently navigating their own shame, ambition, and insecurity. When they look at you, they aren't seeing you. They are seeing a reflection of their own preoccupations. If someone judges your boldness, they aren't critiquing your strategy, and they are reacting to their own fear of being bold. Most of what you perceive as judgment is actually noise generated by the other person's internal conflict. To rebuild your confidence, you must withdraw your attention from this imaginary audience. You must realize that the spotlight you feel is actually a flashlight you are holding and pointing at yourself. When you turn off the light, the audience disappears. This anonymity is the ultimate liberation. You move from being watched to being the one who watches. This deconstruction requires you to understand the hierarchy of the nanosecond attention. In the modern, hyper-stimulated world, the attention span of the judge is microscopic. Even if you fail spectacularly or speak awkwardly, the social memory of that event lasts for approximately 3 seconds before the spectator returns to thinking about their own problems. You are agonizing over a moment that the rest of the world has already deleted to make room for their own notifications. To rebuild, you must practice the 3-second rule. You realize that any social friction you cause is temporary and shallow. It is a blip on the radar. By reducing the weight of the judgment, you increase the speed of your action. You move from the hesitation of the fearful to the momentum of the sovereign. Consider the trap of the approval-seeking loop. When you fear judgment, you calibrate your behavior to maximize approval. You say the safe thing, you wear the uniform, and you suppress your edge. This compliance creates a hollow confidence that is dependent on the nod of the head. But the sovereign person understands the polarization principle. You realize that if everyone likes you and no one respects you, to have impact, you must be willing to be disliked by the mediocre. You lean into the judgment as a signal of differentiation. When someone disapproves of your intensity, it is proof that you are operating at a frequency they cannot reach. This disdain is a compliment to your originality. You move from seeking the center to owning the edge. You must also recognize the law of the self-projected jury. The voices of judgment you hear in your head are rarely original. They are echoes of parents, teachers, or bullies from your developmental years. You have internalized their standards and are now using them to police your own genius. To liberate yourself, and you must undergo a psychological eviction. You must identify the owner of the judgmental voice. When you feel shame, ask, whose voice is this? If it isn't yours, it has no authority in your sovereign state. You reject the borrowed standard. You move from the compliance of the child to the authority of the adult, as this cleaning of the internal house is the foundation of unshakable presence. You move from the defendant to the judge. Think about the physics of social density. When you fear judgment, you look light and porous. You are easily moved by a look or a comment. But when you deconstruct the spotlight, you become heavy. You have internal density. You know that your value is not up for debate in the social market. This mass is what attracts high-value allies. They want to align with the person who is immune to the fickle winds of opinion. They see your indifference to judgment as a source of stability. By refusing to react to the gallery, you increase your market value. You move from the shadow to the source. This requires you to overcome the need for universal understanding. Most people explain themselves because they want to make sure everyone understands they are good people. This explanation is a submission. It grants the judge power over your narrative. The confident person embraces being misunderstood. You realize that greatness is always illegible to the average mind in its early stages. You don't explain, you don't defend, you allow the masses to have their theories. This mystery is magnetic. It signals that you are operating on a timeline they cannot see. You move from the open book to the fortress. This deconstruction extends to your physicality. You must stop scanning the room for approval. You fix your gaze on your objective. You move with a deliberate tempo that ignores the rhythm of the crowd. And this autonomy of motion is the physical manifestation of freedom from judgment. It tells the world that you are not waiting for a cue, you are the cue. You move from the dancer to the choreographer. Start practicing the sovereign scan. The next time you feel watched in a public space, consciously turn the tables. Instead of worrying about what they think of you, audit the room. What is the energy of that person? Why are they dressed like that? What is their objective? By becoming the observer, you collapse the spotlight. You reclaim your sovereignty. You are no longer the object. You are the subject. The clinical deconstruction of the spotlight effect is the shattering of your mental prison. It is the reason why you can finally breathe. Without it, your confidence is a performance. But with it, your presence is a reality. You move from asking, "How do I look?" to knowing this is what I am. You are no longer afraid of the imaginary audience because you have realized the seats are empty. The world will learn to admire your boldness the moment you learn to ignore their gaze. You are the deconstruction. You are the clarity. You are the sovereign. And today, your voice is finally heavy enough to silence the room. Chapter 2. The architecture of internal validation. You must now move from dismantling the imaginary audience to constructing the internal throne. Most people suffer from the fear of judgment because they have an external locus of control. Their sense of okayness is like a satellite. It requires a constant signal from the ground station of other people's opinions to function. When the signal is positive, they feel high. When the signal is critical or silent, they crash. This is the feedback loop slavery. It makes you a consequence of your environment rather than a cause. But the person who masters the sovereign voice understands the architecture of internal validation. You realize that confidence is not earned from the crowd. It is asserted from the private core. You move from checking the weather to being the climate. Think about the physics of the sovereign standard. In a kingdom, the king does not ask the peasants if the laws are fair or if his crown looks too heavy. He defines the standard of reality for the entire realm. Most people have democratized their self-worth. They have given a vote to every unqualified stranger on the internet or in the office. To rebuild, here you must disenfranchise the crowd. You establish a private council of exactly 3 people, individuals whose character, competence, and integrity you actually respect. If a judgment does not come from this council, it is statistically irrelevant. It is noise. By shrinking the circle of influence, you expand the density of your identity. You move from the many to the elite. This architecture requires you to understand the hierarchy of the data point. When someone judges you, you must treat it as a clinical data entry rather than a moral verdict. You ask yourself, does this person have the data to make this assessment? Have they built what I am building? Do they live by the standards I uphold? Usually, the answer is no. The person judging your ambition is often the person who settled for safety 10 years ago. Their judgment is not about you. It is a defense mechanism for their own mediocrity. When you label their opinion as unqualified data, it loses its sting. You reject the entry. You move from being wounded to being the auditor. Consider the trap of the value mirror. Many people look at the reactions of others to find out if they are doing a good job. If the room is quiet after they speak, they assume they were boring. If someone frowns, they assume they were wrong. This is reactionary living. The sovereign person understands the projection of certainty. You decide the value of your input before you open your mouth, and you deliver your truth with the assumption that it is vital. If the room is quiet, you assume they are processing your depth. If someone frowns, you assume they are confronting their own limitations. By holding the frame, you force the room to align with your value. You move from the mirror to the lamp. You must also recognize the law of the self-signed contract. Confidence is the willingness to be your own authority. Most people are waiting for a promotion, a certification, or a compliment to grant them permission to feel important. This is status begging. To rebuild, you must sign your own commission. You decide today that you are a high-value operator, not because of your results, but because of your commitment to excellence. You judge yourself by your adherence to your own rituals. Did you wake up on time? Did you speak with directness? Did you protect your boundaries? When you win in these private metrics, the judgment of the world becomes laughable. It is like a pauper trying to critique a billionaire's spending habits. You move from the applicant to the sovereign. Think about the physics of social mass. When you care about judgment, you are light. You are easily blown away by a tweet or a side-eye. But when you anchor your validation internally, you become heavy. You develop gravitational authority. People stop judging you because they realize it has no effect. You become too dense to be bullied by opinion. This impenetrability is highly attractive to high-stakes partners. They want to ally with the person who cannot be swayed by the fickle emotions of the masses. By closing the door on external validation, you open the door to world-class influence. You move from the feather to the anchor. This requires you to overcome the addiction to praise. Praise is the flipped side of judgment. If you crave the compliment, you are vulnerable to the insult. Both are external signals that you are giving power to. The rebuilt sovereign moves toward outcome neutrality. You find satisfaction in the quality of the effort rather than the reception of the result. You play for the applause of your own conscience. When you stop feeding on the approval of others, you starve their power to hurt you. You become emotionally self-sufficient. You move from the addict to the source. This architecture extends to your social language. You must purge the qualifiers and disclaimers from your speech. You stop saying, "in my opinion," or "I might be wrong, but," or "does that make sense?" These are subconscious bids for approval. They invite the judgment you fear. Instead, use declarative authority. State your position as a fact of your reality. This is the direction we are taking. My standard is X. This unapologetic signal deters the critics and calls to the leaders. You move from the suggestion to the command. Start practicing the private review. Tonight, list 3 things you did well today that no one else saw. Acknowledge the excellence of those acts. Then, identify 1 judgment you received or imagined, and formally strike it from your internal record because the source was unqualified. I reject the opinion of X because they have not built the discipline I am currently forging. Feel the weight of your own verdict. You are seating yourself on the throne. The architecture of internal validation is the engine of your second rise. It is the reason why you can never be stopped. Without it, Your confidence is rented from the world, but with it, your sovereignty is owned by the soul. You move from asking, "Am I okay?" to declaring, "I am the standard." You are no longer running from the eyes of the crowd, because you have realized yours are the only eyes that count. The world will learn to respect your reality the moment you learn to stop looking for theirs. You are the standard, you are the validation, you are the sovereign. And today, your inner world is finally heavy enough to anchor your life. Chapter 3: The Psychology of the Social Mirror and the False Consensus. To fully liberate yourself from the fear of judgment, you must understand the mechanical failure of the human brain known as the false consensus effect. Most people believe that their internal insecurities are being broadcasted on a frequency that everyone else is tuned into. You assume that because you are hyper-aware of your shaky hands, your slightly outdated shoes, or your average background, everyone else must be holding those same details under a microscope. This is the mirror hole trap. It convinces you that the judgment you feel is a universal truth shared by the room. But the person who masters the sovereign voice understands the psychology of the social mirror. You realize that the judgment you fear is almost always an echo of your own self-criticism, bouncing off the blank faces of people who are too busy worrying about their own transmission. You move from being a victim of the crowd to being the one who defines the room's energy. Think about the physics of projection. In optics, a mirror doesn't create light. It simply reflects what is placed in front of it. When you enter a social space with contracted energy, shoulders hunched, eyes scanning for exits, voice thin, you are projecting an image of low value. The world then reflects that image back to you through dismissive behavior or condescension. You then interpret this reflection as judgment, which validates your fear. This is a self-fulfilling prophecy. To rebuild your confidence, you must break the mirror. You must realize that people do not judge you based on your flaws. They judge you based on your relationship to your flaws. If you are at peace with your imperfections, the world has no leverage to use them against you. You move from hiding the crack to owning the texture. This psychology requires you to understand the hierarchy of the insecure critic. When you do encounter genuine or vocal judgment, you must perform a status audit on the judge. There is a biological law in human social dynamics. Winners do not bully, they build. High status and high-value individuals are almost never the ones judging your boldness or ambition. They are too busy optimizing their own empires. The judgment you fear almost always comes from the middle management of life, people who have stagnated and feel threatened by anyone who reminds them of their own lost potential. Their criticism is a confession of their limitation. When you see the fear behind their judgment, the judgment evaporates. You move from being small to feeling pity for the small-minded. Consider the trap of the social chameleon. Many people try to avoid judgment by blending in. They mimic the tone, opinions, and rhythm of the group. This camouflage may protect you from criticism, but it also insulates you from impact. You become socially invisible. The sovereign person understands the magnetism of the outlier. You realize that judgment is the friction that proves you are moving faster than the masses. You stop trying to fix the friction and start celebrating it. If no one is judging you, you are not doing anything that matters. When you embrace your divergence, you stop being a chameleon and start being a landmark. You move from the background to the destination. You must also recognize the law of the narrative gap. Judgment only sticks when there is a void in your own story. If you are uncertain about why you are doing something, the judgment of others will fill that gap with their reasons. They will say you are showing off, delusional, or greedy. To rebuild, you must overwrite the narrative. You must have a clarity of mission that is so dense it leaves no room for external interpretation. When you know that your intensity is a service to your mission, the label of arrogance becomes irrelevant. It's like a doctor ignoring a child's complaint about a needle. The purpose neutralizes the protest. You move from the defensive to the purposeful. Think about the physics of perceived authority. When you fear judgment, you wait for the room to give you permission to be powerful. This is low-status signaling. But authority is taken, not given. You must practice the assumption of welcome. You enter every room as if you already belong there and as if everyone already respects you. This assumption removes the need to scan for judgment. Because you assume the judgment is positive, your physiology remains open, your voice remains heavy, and your gaze remains level. This projection forces the social mirror to reflect authority back to you, and you create the reality you desire. You move from the intruder to the host. This requires you to overcome the need for consensus. Most people are terrified of being the only one who thinks X or does Y. They feel safety in numbers. But numbers are the graveyard of genius. The confident person is comfortable with a consensus of one. You realize that if you approve of your direction, that is a quorum. You do not need a second motion. This self-sufficiency is highly attractive to leaders. They want the person who can stand alone in a storm of opinion. By becoming your own majority, you invalidate the judgment of the minority. You move from the committee to the executive. This psychology extends to your digital presence. You must stop reading the comments of the no unqualified. If you are building a personal brand or a business, the judgment of the anonymous masses is data trash. It is noise without signal. You must militarize your focus on the specific feedback of the elite council you established in Chapter 2. Everything else is static, intended to distract you from the work. You move from the scroll to the build. Start practicing the exposure drill. Today, do one thing that is guaranteed: to invite mild judgment from strangers. Wear an unusually bold tie, sit in the front row and ask a direct question, or post a strong opinion online. As the fear rises, observe it. To notice that the sky does not fall. Notice that the judgment dissipates in seconds. You are desensitizing your nervous system. You are realizing that the mirror is made of paper. The psychology of the social mirror is the shattering of the illusion that others have power over your state. It is the reason why you can finally take up space. Without it, your confidence is a fragile glass. But with it, your presence is a diamond. You move from being afraid of what they think to being curious about how they will react. You are no longer hiding your truth to please the crowd, because you have realized the crowd is waiting for a leader. The world will learn to follow your lead the moment you learn to stop looking in their mirror. You are the projection. You are the energy. You are the sovereign. And today, your reality is finally heavy enough to define the world. Chapter 4. The Physics of High Status, Non-Reaction. You have deconstructed the spotlight and built your internal validation, but now you must master the physical battlefield of social pressure. When judgment is directed at you, whether through a sarcastic comment, a dismissive look, or a direct challenge, your biological threat response wants to take over. You feel the heat in your neck, the acceleration of your heart, and the urge to either defend yourself or withdraw. This is the reactivity trap. It signals to the observer that their judgment has penetrated your armor and altered your state. In the language of social status, the person who reacts the most is the person with the least power. But the person who masters the sovereign voice understands the physics of high-status non-reaction. You move from the fragility of the reactive to the heaviness of the unshakable. You realize that silence is not submission, it is dominance. Think about the physics of the shock absorber. A high-performance vehicle doesn't jump when it hits a pothole. Its suspension absorbs the energy, and the chassis remains level. Most people have no suspension. They bounce with every social bump. To rebuild your confidence, you must develop emotional damping. When someone judges you, you allow the words to hit you, but you refuse to let them move you. You maintain a clinical neutrality. You look at the critic with the curiosity of a scientist observing a strange insect. This lack of reaction breaks the interactant's frame. They expect you to flinch, explain, or get angry. When you do nothing, you void their attack. You move from the target to the void. This physics requires you to understand the hierarchy of the social beat. In music, the person who controls the tempo controls the song. In a social interaction, and the person who speaks last and moves slowest controls the status. When you feel judged, your instinct is to speed up, to talk faster, to justify yourself, or to move away to escape. To rebuild, you must practice the sovereign slowdown. You deliberately lower your speaking rate. You increase the length of your pauses. You blink slower. This calmness signals to the other person's nervous system that you are not threatened. It forces them to reevaluate their judgment. If you aren't scared, they assume you have a reason to be confident. You move from the prey to the predator. Consider the trap of the defensive explanation. Many people believe that if they can just explain their reasoning, the judge will understand and withdraw the criticism. This is status suicide. An explanation is a plea for understanding, and a plea is a low-status move. The sovereign person understands the power of so. You do not defend your choices, you own them as obvious. If someone says, "That's a very risky move," you do not explain the risk mitigation strategy. You nod slowly and say, "Yes, it is." And this refusal to validate their concern recenters the power in your court. You are declaring that their opinion is not a factor in your calculation. You move from the defendant to the authority. You must also recognize the law of the breaking eye contact. When people fear judgment, they look away first. This is a primal signal of submission. It tells the judge that they win. To rebuild, you must practice the eye contact surplus. When you are judged or challenged, you hold the gaze for 1 second longer than is comfortable. You do not stare with aggression, which is just reactive anger, but with detached observation. You watch them. This visual weight is unbearable for the insecure critic. They will look away first, breaking their own power. By holding the line, you claim the territory of the interaction. You move from the submissive to the dominant. Think about the physics of social oxygen. Judgment is like a fire. It needs the oxygen of your attention to stay alive. If you argue, you are feeding the fire. If you complain, you are fanning the flames. But non-reaction is suffocation. When you refuse to engage with low-value judgment, the judgment dies of neglect. You become socially inert. You save your energy for the work and the mission. This economy of effort is the mark of an elite operator. People stop judging you because it is boring. There is no payoff. You move from the fire to the stone. This requires you to overcome the urge to win the argument. You must realize that winning the argument is often losing the status. If you sink to the level of the critic to prove them wrong, you have already lost. You have accepted their frame, that your value is up for debate. The confident person wins by refusing to play. You ignore the bait. You stay on your frequency. You continue doing the work. This indifference is the ultimate victory. It proves that your reality is more solid than their opinion. You move from the debater to the achiever. This non-reaction extends to your digital behavior. You must stop replying to critics online. Every reply is a deposit into their account. It elevates their judgment to the level of your time. Instead, use the ghost protocol. You post your truth and disappear. You do not check the notifications. You do not seek the rebuttal. This unreachability is highly attractive. It signals that you are too busy winning to notice the boos from the cheap seats. You move from the chatter to the signal. Start practicing the 2-second pause. The next time someone judges you or challenges you today, do not speak for 2 full seconds. Look at them calmly, breathe. Then, ask a calm, neutral question, or simply nod and walk away. Observe the power shift in the room. You are exercising your non-reaction. You are militarizing your calm. You are ascending. The physics of high-status non-reaction is the armor of your second rise. It is the reason why judgment can no longer hurt you. Without it, you are vulnerable to every look. But with it, you are invincible. You move from being afraid of what they will say to knowing that it doesn't matter. You are no longer performing for the approval of the crowd because you have realized that their disapproval is powerless against your silence. The world will learn to yield to your frame the moment you learn to stop reacting to theirs. You are the stillness. You are the weight. You are the sovereign. And today, your peace is finally heavy enough to claim the future. Chapter 5. The weaponization of strategic vulnerability. You have built the armor of non-reaction, but a fortress that never opens its gates is a prison. Most people believe that overcoming the fear of judgment means becoming a cold machine that never shows a flaw. They attempt to project a perfected image, a scrubbed of all humanity and error. This is the perfectionist's paradox. By trying to be unjudgeable, you actually make yourself more vulnerable. The crowd can sense the stiffness of your performance. They can smell the fear of exposure beneath your polished exterior. This fragility invites people to poke at your cracks. But the person who masters the sovereign voice understands the weaponization of strategic vulnerability. You move from hiding the wound to owning the scar. You realize that authenticity is not weakness, it is the ultimate power move. Think about the physics of the controlled burn. In forestry, a controlled burn is used to clear away dead brush so that a massive wildfire cannot take hold. Most people are full of dead brush, secrets, insecurities, and past mistakes. They are terrified someone will find out. This fear of discovery is what gives the judge their leverage. To rebuild your confidence, you must set the fire yourself. You practice radical disclosure. When you publicly acknowledge your flaw or your failure with clinical detachment, you disarm the critic. If you say, "I used to be terrified of public speaking," or "My first business failed because I lacked discipline," there is nothing left for the judge to expose. You have stolen their ammunition. You move from being a target to being the source of truth. This weaponization requires you to understand the hierarchy of the human connection. In a world of AI-generated perfection and manufactured influences, realness is the highest value commodity. When you reveal a struggle or a limitation, you are signaling a high level of internal security. Only a powerful person can afford to be honest about being weak. This vulnerability creates an instant bridge to the audience. It humanizes your authority. People stop judging you and start rooting for you because they see themselves in your honesty. This alignment is more powerful than perfection. You move from the statue to the leader. Consider the trap of the imposter syndrome. You feel like a fraud because you know you aren't perfect, and you fear the judgment that will come when the world finds out. The sovereign person understands the transparency shield. You don't wait to be found out. You announce your process. You say, I am currently mastering X, and I'm still making mistakes in Y. This removes the imposter from the equation. You cannot be an imposter if you are transparently an apprentice. This intellectual honesty is bulletproof. It protects your confidence because it aligns your internal reality with your external signal. You move from the fake to the genuine. You must also recognize the law of the asymmetric vulnerability. You do not share to seek pity. You share to demonstrate mastery. There is a difference between venting, low status, and disclosing, high status. Venting is leaking emotion to get validation. Disclosing is sharing data to provide value. When you weaponize your vulnerability, you do it with emotional distance. You speak about your past pain or current struggle as if you are describing a mechanical problem you are solving. This detachment signals that the issue no longer controls you, and you are the scientist, and the flaw is the specimen. You move from the victim to the veteran. Think about the physics of social resonance. When you admit a fear or a flaw, you lower the stakes for everyone else in the room. You give them permission to be human. This service makes you the psychological architect of the space. People will gravitate toward you because you are safe and real. This gravitational pull is what builds empires. High-level partners and allies are exhausted by pretense. They crave the person who can state the ugly truth and keep moving. By owning your mess, you become the cleanest person in the network. You move from the performer to the anchor. This requires you to overcome the need to look cool. Cool is static. Cool is fragile. Cool is a mask that judgment loves to shatter. To rebuild true confidence, you must be willing to look foolish in the pursuit of growth. You ask the basic question. You admit when you are confused. You laugh at your own blunders. This sovereign humility is intimidating to the insecure. It proves that your ego is not on the line. When you refuse to be embarrassed, you cannot be judged. You move from the actor to the author. This weaponization extends to your professional life. In a negotiation or a pitch, lead with a small weakness or a past mistake. In my previous project, I overextended the budget, which is why for this project, I've implemented a 3-layer oversight system. This proactive honesty builds instant trust. It shows that you are self-aware and responsible. It takes the weapon of past failure out of the negotiator's hand and places it on the table as a tool. You move from the defensive to the collaborative. Start practicing the small reveal. Today, in a conversation, admit to a small mistake or a minor insecurity without apologizing for it. I actually felt a bit nervous before this call, or I realized I handled that email poorly. Observe how the other person relaxes. Notice that the judgment you expected does not arrive. You are burning the brush. You are clearing the path. The weaponization of strategic vulnerability is the humanity of your second rise. It is the reason why people will love you instead of just watching you. Without it, your confidence is a cold fortress. But with it, to your presence is a home. You move from being afraid of what they will find to being the one who shows them. You are no longer hiding behind a perfect image because you have realized that the image is a lie and the truth is your power. The world will learn to trust your authority the moment you learn to embrace your humanity. You are the disclosure. You are the truth. You are the sovereign. And today, your transparency is finally heavy enough to win the world. Chapter 6: The So What Protocol and the Death of Social Stakes. You have learned to reveal your scars, but you must now master the final kill of judgmental influence. And most people remain paralyzed because they treat a negative social judgment as a terminal event. They believe that if someone thinks they are arrogant, unqualified, or strange, it will create a permanent stain on their reality that cannot be washed away. This is the high-stakes delusion. It treats a conversation like a courtroom and a critic like a judge with the power to sentence you to social exile. But the person who masters the sovereign voice understands the so what protocol. You move from the fragility of the overinvested to the indifference of the high-value operator. You realize that 99% of social judgments have zero caloric value. They cannot starve you, they cannot bankrupt you, and they cannot stop your mission. And think about the physics of the paper tiger. A paper tiger looks vicious from a distance, but it has no teeth and no claws. It only has the power you grant it through fear. Most social judgments are paper tigers. If a stranger on the internet or a distant colleague thinks you are overambitious, what is the actual physical consequence in your life? Does your bank account drop? Does your oxygen supply get cut off? Does your skill set vanish? No. The consequence only exists in the chemical reaction you allow in your own brain. To rebuild your confidence, you must practice consequence mapping. When you feel the sting of judgment, you trace the threat to its logical conclusion. Usually, the conclusion is nothing happens. You move from imaginary catastrophe to objective reality. This protocol requires you to understand the hierarchy of the external noise. In the sovereign state, you categorize incoming information into two bins. Signal, data that helps you improve your mission, and noise, ego-driven opinions that have no functional utility. Most judgment is noise. It is static from people who are bored or envious. When you encounter noise, you apply the so what filter. Someone thinks you're too loud? So what? Someone thinks your idea is stupid? So what? This isn't arrogance. It is prioritization. You are refusing to spend your limited emotional currency on unprofitable ventures. You move from the bank of approval to the treasury of impact. Consider the trap of the reputation manager. Many people spend their entire lives trying to curate a perfect reputation. They want everyone to think well of them. This is an infinite task that guarantees exhaustion. You cannot control the projections of 8 billion people. The sovereign person understands reputational autonomy. You realize that what people think of you is none of your business. It is their internal theater. You abandon the job of managing their thoughts. This resignation is immensely powerful. It frees up 80% of your mental energy to actually achieve the results that prove the critics wrong. You move from the PR agent to the CEO. You must also recognize the law of the social statute of limitations. Even if a judgment is valid and public, it has a decay rate that is faster than you believe. The world moves on instantly. The scandal of today is the forgotten trivia of tomorrow. To rebuild, you must practice temporal detachment. You look at the judgment from the perspective of 1 year in the future. From that vantage point, the current embarrassment looks microscopic. By zooming out, you shrink the stakes. You realize that you are playing a long game, and the boos of a single inning do not determine the outcome of the series. You move from the moment to the era. Think about the physics of sovereign gravity. When you stop caring about the stakes, you become socially heavy. People are drawn to the person who cannot be shamed. Your lack of concern for judgment and signals a level of status that others envy. It suggests that you know something they don't. It suggests that your internal world is so rich and so secure that the external world is just a playground. This playfulness is the pinnacle of confidence. It turns the judgment into entertainment. You watch the critics with a smile because you realize they are providing free marketing for your brand. You move from the victim to the entertainer. This requires you to overcome the need for validation safety. Most people only act when they feel safe, but safety is the enemy of growth. The confident person finds safety in their ability to handle the fallout. You say, "They might judge me, and it might be uncomfortable, but I am strong enough to survive the discomfort." This resilient standard is unbreakable. It removes the power of the judge because you have already accepted the worst-case scenario and found it manageable. When nothing can break you, everything is possible. You move from avoiding the storm to being the rock. This protocol extends to your risk-taking. You must start taking these social risks on purpose. Speak before you are ready. Launch before it is perfect. Ask for the unreasonable. When the judgment comes, and it will, you apply the "so what" protocol immediately. You look the judgment in the eye and say, "Is that all you've got?" You are hardening your spirit. You are becoming indestructible. Start practicing the daily "so what." Identify one judgment or negative outcome you are currently avoiding. Force yourself to trigger it. Post that edgy content. Ask that bold question. When the negative signal returns, pause, breathe, and ask yourself, "So what? What is the actual and physical damage?" Realize the answer is zero. Smile. You are killing the stakes. The "so what" protocol is the final liberation of your second rise. It is the reason why you are finally free. Without it, you are always one comment away from a collapse. But with it, you are the master of your destiny. You move from asking, "Will they like me?" to asking, "Do I like this?" You are no longer hostage to the opinions of strangers because you have realized that their words are weightless. The world will learn to move out of your way the moment you learn to walk through their noise. You are the indifference. You are the reality. You are the sovereign. And today, your purpose is finally heavy enough to crush the fear. Chapter 7. The transmutation of criticism into competitive intelligence. You have learned to survive judgment, but the final evolution of the sovereign voice is to exploit it. Most people, once they become thick-skinned, simply ignore their critics. They treat all negative feedback as hate and build a mental wall that blocks out everything. This is the echo chamber trap. It feels safe, but it makes you blind to the mechanical flaws in your execution. The sovereign person understands the transmutation of criticism into competitive intelligence. You move from defending your ego to mining for data. You realize that your enemies and critics are often the most honest consultants you will ever have, because they are the only ones with the audacity to tell you where you are vulnerable. Think about the physics of the wind tunnel. In aerodynamics, a car is placed in a high-speed wind tunnel not to be praised, but to find drag. The smoke shows exactly where the design is inefficient. Most people treat social wind as an attack on the car, but the rebuilt leader treats it as a drag coefficient test. When someone judges you as confusing, unprofessional, or weak, you do not get angry. You ask, where is the leak in my signal that allowed them to reach that conclusion? If 10 people think you are arrogant, you don't shame them. You audit your communication style to see if you are leaking insecurity that looks like posturing. You move from being insulted to being optimized. This transmutation requires you to understand the hierarchy of the critical signal. You must learn to separate the emotional trash from the functional feedback. If a critic says, "You're a loser," that is trash. It has no utility. But if a critic says, "You talk so much that you never actually provide a solution," that is high-value intelligence. They have gifted you a map to a blind spot. By extracting the data and discarding the insult, you accelerate your evolution at a rate your fans can never provide. Your fans will love you into stagnation, but your critics will judge you into excellence. You move from the victim of the insult to the owner of the insight. Consider the trap of the fragile expert. Many people fear judgment because they tie their identity to being right. When someone points out a flaw, their whole world collapses. The sovereign person understands intellectual fluidity. You hold your ideas loosely and your mission tightly. You are happy to be proven wrong because it means you are closer to the truth. When a judge attacks your logic, you thank them for the stress test. You fix the vulnerability and emerge with a stronger argument. This indestructibility is magnetic. It signals that you are committed to results over reputation. You move from the fragile to the anti-fragile. You must also recognize the law of the opponent's perspective. Your critics are specialists in your weaknesses. They see what you refuse to see. To rebuild, you must practice strategic empathy. You temporarily inhabit the mind of the judge. You look at yourself through their eyes. If I were trying to take me down, where would I hit? This internal audit allows you to reinforce your foundation before the market can shatter it. You are using the judgment of others to build an unassailable fortress. This proactive hardening is the mark of a world-class strategist. You move from the surprised to the prepared. Think about the physics of market research. In business, where complaints are gold. They tell you exactly what the customer wants that they aren't getting. Social judgment is market research for your persona. If the world judges you as untrustworthy, you don't argue with the market. You change the product. You increase your transparency, harden your commitments, and clean your signal. This market responsiveness is what creates dominance. By listening to the judgment without feeling the pain, you become the most adaptable person in the network. You move from the static to the evolutionary. This requires you to overcome the need to be liked. You must realize that respect is earned through competence, and competence is refined through criticism. If you prioritize being liked, you will suppress the data you need to succeed. The confident person values the truth above the truce. You invite the judgment. You seek out the hard room. You ask the difficult person for their honest assessment. This audacity shocks the insecure and earns the devotion of the elite. You move from the seeker of praise to the seeker of truth. This transmutation extends to your competitive strategy. You must analyze the judgment your competitors are receiving. If the market is judging your rival for being too corporate and robotic, you pivot to be more human and vulnerable. You use their judgmental data to carve out your unique territory. You are feeding on the social signals of the entire environment. You move from the competitor to the predator. Start practicing the intelligence extract. Identify one judgment or criticism you received recently that hurt your ego. Write it down. Strip away all the insulting adjectives. What is the core data point left? And they said I was annoyingly aggressive, which means I am dominating the airtime without inviting collaboration. Accept the data. Plan one mechanical adjustment for your next interaction. Feel the power of using your enemy to fix your machine. The transmutation of criticism into competitive intelligence is the final mastery of your second rise. It is the reason why you are unbeatable. Without it, you are vulnerable to blind spots. But with it, every attack makes you stronger. You move from being afraid of what they will say to waiting to hear what they will say, so you can win faster. You are no longer hiding your flaws from the world because you have realized that the world's eyes are your best diagnostic tool. The world will learn to fear your growth the moment you learn to love their judgment. You are the intelligence. You are the evolution. You are the sovereign. And today, your standard is finally heavy enough to convert the world. Chapter 8. The social predator versus the social prey. You have turned criticism into intelligence, but now you must inhabit the final physical and psychological state of the second rise. In every social interaction, there is an invisible status tug-of-war occurring beneath the words. Most people enter a room as social prey. They are scanning for threats, judgment, their movements are jittery, and their energy is contracted as if they are trying to take up less space to avoid being noticed. This prey vibration is what triggers the judgment of the herd. It is a signal of low value that invites aggression. But the person who masters the sovereign voice understands the psychology of the social predator. This is not about harming others. It is about owning the environment. You move from being the one who is watched to being the one who defines the gaze. Think about the physics of predator vision. In nature, and a prey animal has peripheral vision, they are looking everywhere at once because they are afraid. A predator has focal vision. They lock onto an objective and ignore everything else. Most people have peripheral social vision. They are constantly checking the periphery of the room to see who is whispering or looking at them. This distraction is visible in your eyes. To rebuild your confidence, you must practice predatory focus. You select your target, the person you are speaking to, or the task at hand, and you grant them 100% of your visual and mental mass. You ignore the background noise of the crowd. This intensity is unsettling and deeply attractive. It signals that you are too important to notice minor distractions. You move from the scattered to the singular. This state requires you to understand the hierarchy of the space claim. In any room, the person with the highest status is the one who is most comfortable with physical and temporal space. Prey, rush their sentences and minimize their posture. Predators expand. You must practice environmental encroachment. You lean back. You spread your arms. You use the silence between your words as a weapon to test the nerves of others. You refuse to rush to fill the gap. This comfort with tension proves that you do not fear the judgment of the room. You are declaring that this space belongs to your frame. You move from being a guest to being the landlord. Consider the trap of the nice guy mask. Many people hide their power behind a performance of agreeableness because they fear the judgment of being seen as intimidating. This is status suppression. It makes you look untrustworthy. The sovereign person understands the honest edge. You do not soften your truth to please the crowd. You state your disagreement with surgical precision. You interrupt low-value chatter to recenter the mission. This willingness to cause friction is a predatory signal. It tells the world that your loyalty is to the truth, not to social comfort. This integrity attracts loyal followers and terrifies the critics. You move from the people pleaser to the truth teller. You must also recognize the law of the unreacted challenge. When a judge challenges you, they are testing your predatory status. They want to see if they can make you move. Most people react with defensiveness, prey behavior, but the predator responds with stillness. You receive the challenge without changing your expression. You let the words hang in the air until they become heavy for the challenger. Then you respond with a minimalist, high-status query. Why is that a concern for you? This flip forces the judge to justify themselves to you. You have captured their energy. You move from the defender to the inquisitor. Think about the physics of social weight. When you are a social predator, your silence is louder than their noise. You become the gravity well of the room, and people adjust their posture to align with yours. They lower their volume to match in your tempo. This unspoken leadership is the final result of killing the fear of judgment. You are no longer waiting to be evaluated. You are the one performing the evaluation. This shift in perspective changes your entire biology. Your cortisol, stress, drops, and your testosterone, dopamine, confidence, drive rises. You move from the victim of the environment to the engineer of the environment. This requires you to overcome the need for social safety. You must be willing to stand in the center of the disapproval and feel perfectly at home. You realize that the judgment of the herd is irrelevant to the predator. You do not need their love. You demand their attention. This darker edge of confidence is what breaks the chains of mediocrity. It allows you to do what must be done without asking for permission. You move from the follower to the sovereign. This predatory mindset extends to your career. You must stop asking for raises and start commanding value. You stop hoping for referrals and start dominating the market. You use your newfound fearlessness to enter rooms you weren't invited to and provide solutions they didn't know they needed. You are hunting opportunity rather than waiting for it to notice you. You move from the applicant to the force of nature. Start practicing the gaze hold. Today, in a conversation, consciously decide not to be the first one, to look away during a pause. Hold the eye contact with a relaxed, curious expression. Feel the power shift into your hands. Notice how the other person begins to fill the silence to ease their own tension. You are the predator, you are the sovereign, you are the stillness. The psychology of the social predator is the execution of your second rise. It is the reason why you are finally the master of your life. Without it, your confidence is defensive, but with it, your presence is offensive. You move from being afraid of their judgment to realizing their judgment is the proof of your power. You are no longer hiding in the shadows because you have realized that the spotlight belongs to you. The world will learn to move when you move, the moment you learn to stop moving for them. You are the predator, you are the intensity, you are the sovereign, and today, your will is finally heavy enough to reshape the world. Chapter 9, The Sovereign Synthesis, Living Beyond the Verdict. You have deconstructed the spotlight, weaponized your vulnerability, and transitioned from prey to predator. Now you must enter the final permanent state of the second rise, the sovereign synthesis. Most people treat confidence as a peak they summit once, hoping to plant a flag and stay there forever. They believe that once they beat the fear of judgment, it will never return. This is the arrival fallacy. In reality, as your influence grows, the volume of judgment will actually increase. The higher you climb, the more eyes are on you, and the harsher the critique becomes. But the person who masters the sovereign voice understands that living beyond the verdict is not about silencing the world. It is about transcending the signal. You move from fighting the noise to being the silence. Think about the physics of the atmosphere. Near the ground, as the air is turbulent, cloudy, and erratic, this is where the average person lives, buffeted by every social gust and storm of opinion. But as you ascend into the stratosphere, the air becomes thin, clear, and still. The weather happens below you. To rebuild your final form, you must practice altitude autonomy. You realize that the judgment of the masses is a low-altitude phenomenon. It cannot reach the height of your purpose. When you hear the echoes of criticism, you do not descend to address them. As you increase your thrust and climb higher. This detachment is divine. It tells the world that you occupy a different reality. You move from the weather to the sky. This synthesis requires you to understand the hierarchy of the final purpose. Why does the judgment of a stranger hurt? It hurts because you have placed your identity in their hands. But when your mission is heavier than your ego, judgment becomes frictionless. If your goal is to provide value, to build an empire, or to liberate your family, then a comment about your personality or your style is irrelevant to the outcome. You become mission-locked. Like a missile ignoring flares, you stay on the heat signature of your objective. This obsessive focus is terrifying to the mediocre and exhilarating to the elite. By serving a cause larger than yourself, you become untouchable. You move from the self-conscious to the purpose-driven. Consider the trap of the post-success relapse. Many people achieve a win and then immediately revert to seeking approval to keep their new status. They become slaves to their reputation all over again. The sovereign person understands perpetual disruption. You refuse to be defined even by your own success. You continue to evolve, change, and offend the expectations of your audience. You destroy your own image before the world can ossify it, and this fluidity is the ultimate freedom. It proves that you are not a product for public consumption. You are a living force. When the world thinks it has you figured out, you pivot. You move from the brand to the creator. You must also recognize the law of the sovereign silence. The final boss of confidence is the urge to be seen as confident. If you are trying to look like a sovereign, you are still performing for an audience. The reforged leader attains invisible authority. You no longer care if the room knows you are the predator. You do not need the validation of looking powerful. You are comfortable being underestimated. You work in the shadows, accumulate mass in private, and execute with surgical silence. This lack of ego is invincible. It removes the handle that judgment uses to pull you. When you lose the need to be understood, you gain the power to be effective. You move from the display to the engine. Think about the physics of legacy. Your second rise is not just for you. It is a signal fire for the lost. When you live beyond the verdict, you create a hole in the social matrix that others can crawl through. Your fearlessness authorizes their freedom. This is the highest form of sovereignty, the power to liberate others by refusing to be contained yourself. You become a cultural catalyst. People judge you at first, then they watch you in awe, and finally, they imitate you. And by staying true to your internal compass, you rewrite the map for the entire herd. You move from the outlier to the architect. This requires you to overcome the fear of loneliness. The stratosphere is quiet. Not everyone can breathe the air at your altitude. You must be comfortable with the silence of mastery. You realize that the crowd is not your peer group. Your peers are the other sovereigns who have also survived the fire of judgment. You find them not through approval seeking, but through excellence. This elite community is the only jury that matters. When you align with those who understand the cost of the rise, the noise of the masses fades into nothingness. You move from the lonely to the connected. This synthesis extends to your entire life design. You must audit your environment one last time. Remove any residual obligations, relationships, or habits that are anchored in fear of judgment. Build a life that is mechanically optimized for your mission, not social convenience. Live in a way that makes the mediocre uncomfortable and the brave inspired. This unapologetic in existence is the final seal on your sovereignty. You move from the survivor to the ruler. Start practicing the sovereign Sabbath. Today, spend 1 hour acting entirely from internal impulse, without considering how it looks to the world. Walk a different way. Write a raw thought. Dress for pure utility. Feel the weight of your own presence in the absence of external eyes. Realize that this is who you are. This is the sovereign. The sovereign synthesis is the immortality of your second rise. It is the reason why you can never be broken again. Without it, you are at the mercy of the next storm. But with it, you are the storm. You move from asking, "What will they think?" to knowing it doesn't matter what they think. You are no longer hiding your power from the world because you have realized that the world is your canvas. The world will learn to be defined by your presence the moment you learn to be defined by your soul. You are the synthesis, you are the silence, you are the sovereign. And today, your voice is finally heavy enough to carry the future. Chapter 10. The Unjudgeable Legacy, Architecture of the Icon. You have reached the final layer of the second rise. You have mastered the mechanics of internal validation, the physics of non-reaction, and the predatory focus of the sovereign. But now, you must transition from being confident to being a monument. Most people treat their newfound freedom from judgment as a private victory, a shield they use to protect their own peace. This is the isolationist's ceiling. It keeps your power contained. But the person who masters the sovereign voice understands the architecture of the icon. You realize that your unjudgeability is not just a personal trait, it is a public signal that reorganizes the social hierarchy around you. You move from ignoring the noise to becoming the frequency. You realize that the world doesn't just leave you alone once you stop caring. It submits to your reality. Think about the physics of the black hole. A black hole is so dense and its gravity is so absolute that even light, the opinions and observations of others, cannot escape its pull. Most people are gaseous, they are expanded and thin, easily blown away by a single critical comment. To reach the final stage of the second rise, you must attain total identity density. You become so solid in your mission and purpose that judgment doesn't just hit you and fall off. It is sucked into your gravity and crushed by your mass. When you walk into a room, you aren't competing for attention, and you are generating the center of the room by existing with absolute certainty. You move from the participant to the event. This architecture requires you to understand the hierarchy of the living symbol. Once you are free from the fear of judgment, you become a threat to the status quo. The herd will try one last-ditch effort to bring you back down. They will call you cold, robotic, or dangerous. This is the final test of the sovereign. If you flinch or try to explain that you are still a nice person, you lose your density. But if you accept the labels with a clinical smile, you ascend to the level of the icon. You realize that icons are not liked, they are referenced. You become the standard by which everyone else is measured. You move from the individual to the institution. Consider the trap of the nostalgic self. As you rise, your old friends and family will judge you for changing. They will say, "You aren't the person I used to know." This is a guilt trap designed to pull you back into the safety of the herd. The sovereign person understands the necessity of the shed. You bless the old version of yourself, but you refuse to live in its grave. You accept that the price of infinite growth is the loss of commonality. You are building a legacy that transcends your temporary comfort. This ruthless commitment to your evolution is what makes you legendary. You move from the past to the future. You must also recognize the law of the sovereign silence. The final boss of confidence is the desire to show off how confident you are. If you are shouting about your freedom, you are still performing for the gallery. The icon is silent. You let your results, your lifestyle, and your impact do the speaking. You do not engage in debates about your value. You exist as a fact of the market. This impenetrability is deeply intimidating to the insecure and deeply inspiring to the ambitious. You become a mystery that the world spends its time trying to solve. You move from the speaker to the subject. Think about the physics of generational momentum. Your second rise is the foundation for a lineage. By killing the fear of judgment in yourself, you are cleaning the genetic code for those who follow you. And your children, your employees, and your followers will grow up in the gravity of your certainty. They will never know the shame you suffered because you have neutralized the threat. This is the sovereign legacy. You are not just winning a game. You are rewriting the rules of the world. You move from the survivor to the ancestor. This requires you to overcome the need for a final verdict. You must realize that the judgment of the world never truly stops. It just stops mattering. You embrace the perpetual motion of the rise. You find your joy in the mechanical precision of your life, not the external rewards. You reach a state of sovereign equilibrium where the boos and the cheers sound the exact same. They are both just air moving through space. You are the mountain, you are the rock, you are the icon. This architecture extends to your final presence. You walk with the weight of history. You speak with the tempo of eternity. You look at the world with the eyes of a creator. You have completed in the transmutation. The man who feared judgment is dead. The sovereign has arrived. You move from the seeker to the source. Start practicing the icon's gaze. Today, stand in a high-traffic area and simply observe the chaos of human insecurity swirling around you. Do not judge it. Do not fix it. Simply be the still point in the center of the storm. Feel your internal mass. Feel your unjudgeable density. Realize that you are no longer a part of the noise. You are the silence. The architecture of the icon is the immortality of your second rise. It is the reason why you are now untouchable. Without it, your confidence was a tool. But with it, your existence is a statement. You move from being afraid of what they think to being the only thing they can think about. You are no longer running from the eyes of the world because you have realized that the world is looking to you for the answer. The world will learn to build monuments to your will the moment you learn to be your own monument. You are the icon. You are the density. You are the sovereign. And today, your legacy is finally heavy enough to anchor the world.